Welcome to the City Current Show. I'm your host, Jeremy Park. We're always honored to bring you inspiring stories of individuals and organizations making a difference, empowering the good. And we're honored to be with Amy Braley Franck. She's the founder and president of Never Alone Advocacy. Amy, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on today. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. So we'll talk a lot about the good work you do, but let's start with some history. Give us a little bit of history for launching the organization.
So I was working within the military, and we found that service members that fight for our rights for freedom of speech did not have their same voice, and that their voices were being silenced. Our organization loves the military, but we found that there are a few bad apples that spoil the bunch. And when service members' voices are silenced and they don't have any help, that's why we stood up Never Alone Advocacy. My son served in the Army, and we were trying to come up with the name of the organization. He said, "Mom, it has to be Never Alone, because you're never supposed to leave a battle buddy behind or a service member behind." And what we found was they were being left behind to languish in their trauma and without their voice and being silenced. And we saw that there was a lot of service members taking their own lives. And we defined that as murder by suicide because the environment was so toxic that they couldn't leave on their own because they don't have the right to leave on their own. So that's why we stood up Never Alone.
When you look at the pandemic and the focus in terms of what it's done around mental health, suicide, all of these very important topics, and helping to open the access for them and normalize these sort of conversations, I think it plays a vital role. And obviously the pandemic has played a vital role also in how it's impacted the military service members. So talk about kind of that side of opening the floodgates around these conversations, but also how the pandemic has impacted exactly what we're talking about.
Well, it is, Simon Sinek said it beautifully on a TED Talks. He said, when you are punished, you get put in prison. And when you're in prison, the worst punishment is, solitary confinement. And the pandemic has really done that. And so if you're traumatized, whether it's from sexual violence, domestic violence, trauma from seeing a traumatic event or being at war, and then when you're placed in a position when you're in solitude, we're seeing a real national security crisis. And, that's not Amy Braley Franck's opinion. Even the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, issued a memo March of this year to launch an investigation as to why so many service members are committing suicide, because we have a complete epidemic in the military with the highest rate of suicide. Even right here in our backyard in Nashville, Fort Campbell was listed as one of the bases with the top suicide rates in the country. And we really have to look at why our service members that are joining an all-volunteer force committing suicide to leave. And it really goes all the way back to culture. And and it's a top-down issue, because it's a leadership driven. And why aren't these people feeling empowered to ask for help? Why is it a weakness to ask for help? It should be a strength to define that you need help and to move forward.
I think it is nice when you're seeing so many musicians, celebrities, and those now saying publicly, I need help, I'm going to get help. I think those things normalize. But to your point, being able to say so in a culture that doesn't necessarily allow for that creates a lot of friction. And so talk about how the magic works on your end. So, how does it work on your end? Talk about the process, the program, talk about how it works.
Well, so for Never Alone Advocacy, we do several things. We advocate for crime victims' rights, and we ensure that their rights are insulated. And then we give them referrals to services. There are a lot of grassroots organizations that provide free counseling, that if you are a service member and you feel that you are suicidal or you're traumatized or you're a victim of a crime, and you're worried if you ask for help that it's going to adversely impact your career, there are people and entities in your backyard that will help you, that it doesn't have to necessarily adversely impact you. There are grassroots rape crisis centers and mental health facilities. I mean, we have the YWCA right here in Nashville and other great organizations to help. And so we give a linkage so they don't feel like they're in prison, that there are other things outside of the military, and that we are one big community and we can help each other. And we want our veterans and our active duty service members to be well, because they're doing the job that most Americans don't sign up to do. And we need them to do those jobs. I mean, we literally have a national security crisis because we have a retention issue and a recruitment issue in the military. And it's because people are not staying in because the culture has got to be corrected. And part of that is what we're doing is try to amplify voices and try to get people some justice and some help so they feel whole again.
I think there's two layers, like you said. One is for those who have served and gone into combat, it's processing that. And I think that's a very difficult thing when you talk about going to war and what you experience as a result of that. And my brother serving in the Marines, I know firsthand, as a family member, just kind of hearing the stories, but what they go through, processing that. And then to your point, just because you're on a base, you might not have any ties to the local community where you are. And so understanding, like you're talking about, where can I go to get help? Who can I trust? What are the services? Mm-hmm. Having ties to the community, it sounds easy in one place, but if you're not from that area and you're just assigned there, you're based there, you don't have that. And so being able to tap into that network and say, mm-hmm. okay, look, here's where you go. Here's who you can trust. Here's how we can keep it. So it's not something that's going to be reflected. It's a good thing for you, and it's not going to impact your career. And I think there's all these nuances you have to think through, but having your specialization on your end, but also the network, is part of where that magic comes in. Share, obviously you don't have to name names, but, talk about some of the testimonials on your end in terms of the impact and how you're playing an important role in this.
Well, it's interesting that you asked that, because just this morning I received a text message from a domestic violence survivor that was suicidal, thought her husband was going to kill her, and she had 3 small children, and she just had nowhere to go. And, we were able to link her up with a pro bono attorney. We got her into a women's shelter that had a program to get her stabilized. And she said, I have hope now. I have a life now, and, God led me to you. And now I have a pathway for happiness for myself and my children. And, every time that you can impact somebody's life like that, and not every person that's a victim of a crime, gets justice. Is even with the untimely death and sexual assault of a young soldier by the name of Asia Graham, who is deceased now because, she was not protected from her assailant. An article just came out this morning. We were able to assist the family to push for justice for Asia Graham. And come to find out, Christian Alvarado, as they published today, was a serial offender. Because we worked with News Nation and Rich McHugh, they amplified what had happened to Asia Graham via her text messages, and he was court-martialed and put to jail. And so that is not only a win for the family of the deceased service member, but it's a win for the military, and it's a win for our community, because that's one predator that is identified and not going to harm another person. And, we're very proud of that work, and we like to work collaboratively with the military. And if somebody in the organization has harmed a victim that's reporting in the process of reporting, then we like to utilize our points of contact within the military and say, hey guys, did you understand this was happening? And more times than not, the action is corrected. Unfortunately, we have had incidences where we had to amplify the issue by utilizing the fourth estate, the press. We don't like to do that. But if it comes down to justice and transparency, it is, that's why the fourth estate exists and freedom of speech exists. But we're really finding that it's being very collaborative, and working with the military has been successful moving forward. And, too, the military has two different ways for crime victims to report. They can report in a confidential manner, or they can report something to go forward with a law enforcement investigation. And one of the things that we can do as well is get service members or spouses with grassroots rape crisis or domestic violence center, whether you're a male or a female, and get them help and counseling and the right medical services so they can make a proper informed decision, and so that they can heal themselves before moving forward. So I think that's very important.
I think it's also important to note that your efforts are international. So talk about that piece. You mentioned obviously kind of the local piece with the Middle Tennessee area, but you work really all over. So talk about kind of the scope of this.
So we liaison with individuals throughout Europe and Asia, all over the United States, work with embassies, different grassroots organizations, the Murad Code, which is Nadia Murad is a Nobel Peace Laureate, and they work with crimes during conflict and things like that. So we have different people kind of embedded in very interesting, neat places that we can put touch points to help individuals.
A lot of this is obviously raising the awareness for what you do and where people can go to get help and that process. But talk about how we as a community can help your efforts.
I think that, to pay attention when people are running for office and how they're voting for, access to behavioral health, access to medical care for service members, how are people held accountable when they don't follow federal laws? So when a commander doesn't do what they're supposed to do, when a young service member, male or female, reports that they're a victim of a violent crime, they should be being held accountable, because it's federal obstruction of justice. So when we have reform and things like that, that's great. But we also have laws, federal laws that have been on the books since 2006 that are not being enforced. So we need to urge our senators in the great state of Tennessee to ask the hard questions when people are being confirmed for different chiefs of staff in the different service branches. Why aren't you holding these generals and colonels accountable when they don't follow federal law? And don't confirm them until they answer the question. Listen to your constituents, listen to the Gold Star families that had to bury their children. Pat Tillman's organization, he's an ex-NFL player. His family got to know the truth about how he died, but it was because he was an ex-NFL player and he had some very high-level people putting a lot of pressure. Every service member that passes away, their families deserve the same truth.
I think in a good way, you have social media and a lot of things that are pushing for transparency and accountability, and the truth will come to light at some point, hopefully. And I think, to your point, holding people accountable in those positions and pushing in that direction is a very important piece of this equation. What else gives you encouragement when you look at kind of where things are headed around the idea of transparency, accountability, creating positive change? What's something that is an encouragement for you that we're headed in the right direction?
I think that, people are really coming together on this topic, and understanding that, we love our military. We love our veterans. My grandfather served in World War II. My father served, my son served. I served in a civilian capacity. I didn't wear a uniform, but I come from a family of military service. And I think people coming together and understanding that this is not like a Democrat or Republican issue. This is a national security issue. And seeing that the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, is like, we have a crisis, that our servicemen and women are killing themselves. And we have to pay attention to that. And looking at the Veteran Administration and the VA hospitals and what kind of care we're giving our service members, and looking at different kinds of therapy to give them, alternative like equine therapy, and not just giving people pills, right? And just seeing that people actually are stopping and asking people if they're okay. I think that gives me hope. There are way more good people in the world. There are way more good commanders in the military than there are bad. It's just holding those few accountable that will change our culture. It doesn't take a lot, just a little bit, taking that little time to stop. It's like helping somebody across the street that has a cane, I think just getting those small little messages from our clients, it's like the starfish story, every person matters, and it mattered to that one.
And I think that's the key is, everyone matters. You want to be able to provide the support services, take care of those who are taking care of us and fighting for our freedoms, and make sure that everyone has what they need to be able to thrive physically, but really mentally and spiritually and everything, just like you're talking about. We gotta love on each other and take care of each other. And that's
absolutely.
Yeah. Wrap up with where we can go to learn more and carry this conversation forward. So website, social media, where do we go to learn more?
So neveraloneadvocacy.org is our website. And so Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Never Alone Advocacy. Our logo is Orange Rising Phoenix. So we feel free to reach out to us on social media. We're happy to help. And if we're not the right fit to help you, we have a network of people that we work with. I'm also the co-chair of the Military Women's and Veterans Coalition. So we have a lot of people doing a lot of great work, and we're happy to connect you.
Awesome. Well, Amy, I greatly appreciate everything you're doing. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.